Welcome to this special edition of PIX on Politics. I'm Henry Rosoff, and today we are going issue by issue, candidate by candidate in the race for New York City mayor. There are 5 men vying to lead the city in what could be the closest general election this coming November we've seen in some 2 decades. And the reason it could be so contentious is the stunning Democratic primary win by Zohran Mamdani. Mr. Mamdani is a 33-year-old Queens State Assemblyman. He's a Democratic socialist who made a number of big promises in the primary round, but along with them, there are big concerns about if he can deliver. Also in the race is independent candidate, 67-year-old former governor Andrew Cuomo. He lost the Democratic primary to Mamdani despite being a heavy favorite. Cuomo is pledging to run a better campaign this time. He, of course, has a lengthy political history, including major accomplishments as governor, like rebuilding LaGuardia Airport, but also resigned amidst a sexual harassment scandal. Next is the current mayor of New York City, 64-year-old Eric Adams. He declined to run as a Democrat following the dismissal of his federal corruption charges by the Trump administration. Adams says he's running on his record this time as an independent candidate. The Republican in the race is Curtis Sliwa, 71-year-old founder of the Guardian Angels, a public safety group known for their red jackets and berets. Sliwa is most focused on subway safety in particular and was the nominee in 2021, losing to Mayor Adams. Finally, we have a third independent option for city voters, the experienced lawyer Jim Walden. Walden got into the race as an anti-corruption candidate, but has become something of an anti-Mamdani coalition leader, suggesting that candidates need to coalesce around one person to defeat Mr. Mamdani, citing Mamdani's socialist agenda and concerns from the Jewish community about Mamdani's past statements. And I'm now joined by J.C. Polanco, attorney, political analyst, and assistant professor at the University of Mount St. Vincent. He's one of several guests we'll be having during this special to break down this race. So, J.C., let's just start with some opening thoughts for you on this race for mayor. What do you think?
I think this is as exciting as it gets. Mm-hmm. Henry, this is like a mayoral race like we've never seen before. You have an exciting 33-year-old assemblyman out of Queens who just shocked the entire country in this political earthquake of a primary win just last month. And you have a former governor coming in and saying, I may have lost that primary, but I want to give it another shot. You have the sitting mayor with the power of incumbency saying, I'm the mayor, and you guys have to come after the king, right? Mm-hmm. You have Curtis Sliwa, who's a known entity here in New York City, saying, hey, I'm one of you. I ran 4 years ago. We know Curtis. We know that red beret from a mile away. And Jim Walden, who is pushing himself as the moderate centrist voice in this campaign. Yeah,
a serious person, you know, a former federal prosecutor. We sometimes see third-party candidates be a little goofy. That's not Jim Walden. He's a very serious person.
Very serious candidate. There's also a guy named Mr. Hernandez that's running out there as well. So you have a lot of candidates, and the polling data is showing that no one has a majority of the vote. Now, what's great about this election and why political reporters, especially senior reporters here at PIX, are so excited is...
Won't be able to take someone vacation is what you mean.
Vacation time. No vacation time. But you don't need a majority of the vote, Henry. Mm-hmm. All you need is a plurality, so you can actually win this with less than 50% of the vote.
Different
easily
than ranked choice voting, which we just saw in the primary. So we're going to get to all the issues. We're going to get to housing, affordability, crime, transportation, President Trump. We're going to get to all the issues, and that's going to be the main focus of this. But on the raw politics of this, let's talk about what we've seen play out immediately after Mr. Mamdani winning the Democratic primary. And that's Mr. Walden and Mr. Cuomo in particular saying, we need one guy to try to take down Mr. Mamdani. Not everyone, namely Adams and Sliwa, have hopped on board with that. But do you think this will come down to one person versus Mamdani? And if it does not, does Mr. Mamdani probably win?
That's a great question. And I hear it all over the city. That's a concern folks have. If you look at every poll right now, Assemblyman Mamdani is a juggernaut, and so is his campaign. So that means that when you take a look at some of the polls, he's at 36 or 38% of the vote right now, which means that there's a lot of room there and that the majority of New York is looking elsewhere, which is why you have Jim Walden say, which is why you have Governor Cuomo say, let's all coalesce behind one candidate that can stand up to Assemblyman Mamdani and bring this home. If the opposition vote is divided the way it is, Henry, the math ain't mathing.
Yeah, like 10% to Adams, 20%
The math
to
ain't
Cuomo.
mathing,
Yeah.
and I like these guys, and we'll talk about it all the time. But there's just no way. I don't see it. I don't see a world where you can have 4 in opposition against a juggernaut like Assemblyman Mamdani in a Democratic town. Look, within the next few weeks, this is what's going to happen. Assemblyman Mamdani is simply going to get more popular. He's going to consolidate the Democratic Party. More Democrats are going to get in line. Unions are going to get in line.
And you already see some of this happening.
We already see it happening. The national media is going to make him a celebrity, a la AOC, and he's going to be stronger than ever before. So if you ever want to have a shot against Assemblyman Mamdani, the time is now to coalesce behind one candidate and go all out to try to defeat the policies that Assemblyman Mamdani is pushing that obviously from the polls, it looks like the majority of New Yorkers not exactly on board with.
JC, we're going to get into a lot of those issues, and we'll be right back after a quick break to discuss all of those issues. Welcome back to this special edition of PIX on Politics, where we are going candidate by candidate and issue by issue in the race for New York City mayor. Let's begin with the top issue, arguably. That would be housing and the rent. And let's begin by breaking down each of the candidates' policies and positions. Democratic nominee Zohran Mamdani has promised to freeze the rent across 1 million units of stabilized housing in the city, which is within the mayor's control through the Rent Guidelines Board. He is pledging to build around 200,000 new units of rent-stabilized housing and to crack down on bad landlords more aggressively. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo is pledging to build or preserve 500,000 units of housing. He told me he would take on converting vacant city land into apartment buildings as a, quote, special project to help cut the red tape. And he favors a small increase in rent-stabilized housing to help small landlords keep up with expenses. Mayor Eric Adams points to his City of Yes rezoning plan that will enable a little more housing in every neighborhood. He has also championed changes to New York City's Public Housing Authority that have accelerated public-private partnerships and led to thousands of units being renovated. But the mayor has also allowed rent increases for rent-stabilized tenants each of his nearly 4 years in office. He, too, cites landlord expenses. Republican Curtis Sliwa says he wants to empower community boards to have more decision-making authority when it comes to housing. Sliwa would help landlords of rent-stabilized buildings subsidize the often costly renovation of some 25,000 vacant units that currently exist around the city, and he would attempt to repeal the mayor's City of Yes plan. Independent candidate Jim Walden is proposing encouraging the building of 50,000 units of housing annually. He'd look to streamline building approval processes with ideas like generating pre-approved designs for rental buildings. Walden says he's also like to reform tax incentives around building housing in the city. Let's bring back in JC now to discuss everything housing, and we'll get to the overall issues of affordability and some of the other big promises in this race. But on housing, everyone's promising to build more. Everyone kind of knows we need more housing. But will it actually happen? Are people going to be able to keep some of these big promises they're making?
Look, you could promise the moon as much as you want, but we got to remember this is New York City. We saw how difficult it was for Mayor Adams to put his City of Yes through, right? And how much opposition there was across the city. The fact is that everyone wants more housing, but not in my backyard, we don't, right?
Yeah.
NIMBY.
The whole NIMBY thing, yeah, exactly.
That's right. And the truth is we're seeing it across the city, even with folks that have benefited from housing developments say, we don't want any more new housing. We don't want new housing. We don't know who these people are that you're moving across the street. We don't want our property value to be impacted by this. So there are some very serious political consequences to some of these promises. Not only are there serious costs involved, the ever-escalating costs of actually putting these things together, but the political process that is going to entail. You know, when these council members are so powerful in their districts, you have to remember that you have to get the powerful city council member to agree to a lot of this stuff, and you don't want to pay the price and go over a city council member's head by pushing some of these. And remember that at the end of the day, it's about votes, and a lot of folks in those communities don't want to ruin the character of their neighborhoods with new developments.
Yeah, I mean, just to put some numbers in perspective, Mayor Adams tried to do, in the grand scheme of things, relatively modest rezoning, hoping for 100,000 units over 10 years. He ended up getting 80,000 units over 15, and it took $1 billion from the state to deliver the package.
Right.
I mean, so that shows you, in real time what what the politics can do to the ambition of some of these big proposals.
These ambitions sound great on paper, but they're just not realistic. And New Yorkers are smarter than that. When you hear people throwing around $250,000, $500,000 new housing developments, you know that's going to be very hard to do, especially in a city as political as New York City. And take a look at New York City communities and neighborhoods. These are communities that don't want to ruin their character with new developments, and you're going to get a lot of resistance on the ground.
Let's talk about rent stabilization, because Mr. Mamdani has been driving the conversation, and a lot of these topics really sees it as a silver bullet, both freezing the rent for about 2 million New Yorkers, not an insignificant number of people, but also anything the city subsidizes on his watch, he's saying should become rent stabilized. About 200,000 units is his estimation. Is rent stabilization really the silver bullet that he thinks it is?
Well, I think that there are some major misunderstandings, I think, with the way the proposals are coming. Nothing, I think, made him as popular as promising that rent freeze. I mean, you have 2-year-olds saying, I'll freeze a rent, just copying the commercials. It was so effective. But the truth is that, yes, he can appoint the 9 members of the board. Yes, he can do that, the rent guidelines board that determines these rent increases. And he could appoint people to the board that agree with his political position on rent freezes. The problem is that the board has a legal duty to review the numbers before voting. So it is very important that he always remembers that the board members have an independent duty to review what are the costs and what are the current economic trends in the city before voting.
Rubber meets the road here. You see building maintenance, other costs. We enter another inflationary cycle. You see all that rising. It's going to be very hard to freeze the rent under those circumstances.
Yeah, Henry, these are not rubber stamps. The board members are, and the way that I see it portrayed by Assemblyman Mamdani is that they will do as they're told, when that's not the legal duty and the oath that these board members take when they have to take into account those things. And remember this, rent-free sounds really good on paper, but there are a lot of costs that are not frozen for small mom and pop landlords. Viewers have to remember that a lot of the landlords across the city are not major corporations. They're mom and pop landlords that decided to invest in a property with the money that they've saved. Now you're telling them that the cost of insurance will increase. You're telling them the cost of oil and gas will increase, the cost of maintenance will increase, but we're not going to increase the amount of money that you're going to be able to charge new tenants for rent. That's a major problem.
And that's the argument that Mr. Adams and Mr. Cuomo are making in particular. Let's move on to New York City public housing, because this is an important constituency. It's well within the mayor's control. 1 in every 17 New Yorkers lives in public housing. What do public housing residents need and deserve from their next mayor?
They deserve everything New Yorkers want. Look, 20% of all violent crimes are happening in NYCHA housing, yet they make up 4% of New Yorkers that live in New York City. These people want safe areas to raise their families. So enough lip service. I live near NYCHA development. I speak to a lot of the folks that are there. They're concerned about the maintenance that's happening. They're concerned about elevators. They're concerned about safety. They want to make sure that their kids are able to go outside and play. And I think that we have failed that community for too long. So it's time that we step up and invest. Some of the questions I think that the candidates have to ask themselves, is NYCHA housing going to be permanent? Or is it transitional housing for people to get back on their feet while they look for other opportunities? I'm a New Yorker my whole life. It doesn't seem as if it's transitional anymore. It seems like it's long-term housing for families.
Yeah. So I see generation after generation sort of hand off some of this property.
So we have to just have an honest conversation. If that's going to be the case, how do we really focus on helping the lives of the people that live in NYCHA so they can have a better place?
Well, JC, thanks for chopping up housing with us. You're sticking around as we have a conversation about affordability in the city's job market. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Henry Rosoff, senior political reporter for PIX 11, and we're continuing to go issue by issue through all of the candidates seeking to be the next mayor of New York City. We just discussed housing, but let's widen things a bit to issues of affordability and jobs. Democratic nominee Zohran Mamdani's plans in particular have really driven this conversation during the last few months. He's proposing a pilot program of city-run grocery stores to try and help stabilize grocery prices. Mamdani is also pledging to build up to universal child care for infants all the way up to schooling age, and he'll pay for many of his pricey plans, including others that we will discuss coming up, by taxing corporations and the wealthy. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo is promising to work to raise the minimum wage to $20 per hour. He did raise it to $15 while governor, and Mamdani, by the way, says the minimum wage should be at $30. Cuomo is also promising to expand 3K to more neighborhoods and make it more accessible to more families. And finally, the former governor is pledging to make sure 35% of city contracts, that's billions and billions of dollars each year go to minority and women-owned business enterprises. Mayor Eric Adams often points to the $30 billion in tax relief he's given to lower-income New Yorkers, particularly young families. He also touts the recovery from COVID under his watch, with the city now having a record number of jobs. But Mayor Adams has frequently clashed with the city council when he's proposed education cuts and cuts to libraries in response to paying for the recent migrant crisis. Republican Curtis Sliwa has pledged to cut property taxes for residential buildings. He'd pay for it and other initiatives by modifying the substantial property tax breaks that Madison Square Garden and universities get. Sliwa also says he'll heavily invest in parks and green spaces as a way of increasing value and quality of life around the city. Jim Walden is branding himself a, quote, free market candidate, leading an effort to push back against Mamdani's more socialist ideals. But among Walden's more specific proposals is property tax reform, which Mayor Adams said he would do, but never did. Walden would also rehire fired city workers who would not comply with COVID vaccine mandates. Going to bring back in JC Polanco now for this discussion of affordability and jobs and many of these big plans. JC, what strikes me as I kind of review some of these plans and some of these thoughts, Albany is going to have a lot to say about this, right? I mean, so like, how is Albany going to react or help or block implementation of some of these plans?
Well, listen, I don't see Albany raising taxes on New Yorkers right now. It's an election year. Governor Hochul was very clear about not raising taxes on New Yorkers. But a lot of the things that we see being pushed by Assemblyman Mamdani require there to be increases in taxes. He talks about increasing taxes on the wealthy here in New York City.
And corporations,
Pay for a lot of these things. Well, consider this. Top 2% of all New Yorkers pay almost 51% of all New York City income taxes. I mean, think about it, that's a lot. Considering that we have a lot of these programs and services that Assemblyman Mamdani is depending on to fund, it's going to require a tax hike that's just not coming. And furthermore, we also have to remember that since 2010, we've lost about 1.5 million New Yorkers to other states, mostly red states. So there are political consequences with some of these decisions to raise taxes, as the people that can leave the state have proven that they can leave. And
now, I'll do service to Mr. Mamdani and say that there's also a lot of working families that are leaving as well, which is the argument he makes whenever people discuss this.
I understand that, but the tax-paying base that we desperately need to continue paying for our services, they find it very easy to leave New York and have set up shop in other states, and will take their companies elsewhere as well. So it's a very delicate line. We hear Mayor Adams and Governor Cuomo also talk about how delicate we have to be when we talk about raising taxes, because if they leave, then who's going to pay the taxes necessary to fund some of these programs that he's asking for? So Governor Hochul has already said she's not going to increase taxes, and Assemblyman Mamdani's plans are going to get a little cold war on him. Now, I got to tell you this. If he does win in November, he'll be very powerful. And many of those assembly members are going to be representing districts that he won largely. So are they going to be the ones that are going to ruffle his feathers and vote no, considering that Democrats have a supermajority in Albany? I don't think so.
And Speaker Carl Hastie in the Assembly has already said, despite what the governor said, hey, we're open to more taxes on the wealthy. Maybe not a huge increase, but we've put it in our one-house budget for a number of years. And Cuomo and now Hochul have said, no, I'm not raising taxes.
Yeah, they have to say that, because outside of New York City, this is an echo chamber that we live in. And I got to make sure your viewers remember this. Outside of New York City, New York is very red, especially when you move outside of the Hudson Valley. If you take a look at several of the last governor's races in New York, Republicans do very well outside of New York City. And now with how Long Island is trending Republican, Governor Hochul has to be very careful on raising taxes on anyone, especially on those that are living outside of the New York City region who are already overtaxed.
Let's get into some specific proposals, though, because the city-owned grocery stores have gotten a lot of attention. Mom and pops and the Katzimatidis of the world are worried about their grocery margins. That being said, this is a 5-store pilot program. Let's just say he drops these in what are effectively food deserts where there's no other options. Are these concerns still well-founded, or if that's the extent of it, is this a nothing burger?
It's not a nothing burger. Look, you have thousands of bodegas, I care deeply about, Henry, who are going to be in competition now with the more popular government-run grocery store
that don't have to turn a profit.
Don't have to turn a profit while they do. So they have to work in these margins. They have to pay rent, they have to pay electricity, they have to pay for labor and on costs and all of this so that they can provide food at an affordable price to the communities they've been serving this whole time. And here comes this very ultra-socialist idea of opening this up. Now, I know that there's an article on Gothamist about, LaGuardia having started something similar. It's very different. What
the
those
subsidized market
talking about subsidized rent so that some pay lower rents, not to confuse the issue. Having these pilot tryouts would be devastating, because what if it works? What if all of a sudden the entire area is going to these government-run supermarkets? What happens to all those bodegas?
You have other job and economic problems that could create.
Yes, there's unintended consequences to each one of these things. It will be devastating to all of those bodegas, all of those delis, all of those Korean food stores that I grew up going to in my community. They will be gone. It won't be able to compete with a powerful city-run government.
If I may, because I want to get some other stuff in this section, there's some discussion around raising the minimum wage. Governor Cuomo's number is 20. Mr. Mamdani's number is 30. It does seem like we're headed in a direction of an increasing minimum wage, but the state minimum wage is already pegged on inflation. So this seems like it would be a talking point that would move in an upward direction. Is that how you see it? Like the wage is probably going up at a minimum here?
I think so. I think that the political will is there to increase the minimum wage. But again, not to be Debbie Downer, Henry, but can small businesses afford that? I mean, think about that. That's a lot of money for a small business to pay here in New York City that's starting off, and they may want to just go open up elsewhere where they don't have this minimum wage to deal with, which would have unintended consequences. Our young people already have large and a very high unemployment. Raising the minimum wage will exacerbate that unemployment rate amongst young people as more and more jobs become automated. I've seen it with McDonald's and other places where I saw my students at the university go work across the street, and now those jobs are no longer there. They've been automated.
The big automated screens.
They've been automated. Now, there are going to be more automation. We could have the discussion of AI, et cetera. But the truth is that if you're a small business and you can't afford $30 an hour, you're just going to go take your job elsewhere.
Well, JC, I appreciate you sticking around with us for the first few topics. You'll be back with us later on to discuss President Trump. But moving ahead next, we will be discussing crime, policing, transit with some of our best reporters in the business here at PIX 11. Stick around. Welcome back. Let's move now to public safety. Though it's not the number one issue in the polls, as it is many years when there's a race for mayor, it's still the top concern for many New Yorkers. So let's break down what each of these candidates are hoping to do if they end up leading the city. Democrat Zohran Mamdani certainly has some different views of public safety and policing. He would build out a quote-unquote Department of Community Safety with an emphasis on round-the-clock social workers, outreach workers, and greeters, particularly in and around the subway system. He's been taken to task for past comments about defunding the police. Mamdani has said he would not defund the police, but also that he would not hire more NYPD officers, keeping the current force level at its approximate level of 33,500 officers, even though there is room in the budget to hire more, 35,000 officers. He may, however, keep NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, who he's praised for cleaning house at the department. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo says he will hire 5,000 new police officers. He also says he will lean into involuntary commitments, clearing subway stations of mentally ill homeless people every day in the evening. Cuomo also says he will lean into more technological innovations to improve policing. Mayor Eric Adams is often quick to point out that a lot of what Cuomo is proposing, he's already doing, and in fact, major crime statistics are falling. Adams also was able to get a handle on the illegal cannabis shops, which exploded around the city, and shut down most of them. But Adams, a former police captain himself, has put questionable leadership in charge of the NYPD with numerous scandals, investigations, and lawsuits of top people and himself. Republican Curtis Sliwa brags he campaigns in the subways 2 hours each day, much more than any other candidate. He says he would hire 7,000 new NYPD officers and empower specialized units of officers to get more aggressive with those committing crimes. And he says he'd bring back NYPD's official homeless outreach unit, although Mayor Adams does already use officers to do a lot of homeless outreach currently. Jim Walden says he would take New York back to quote-unquote broken windows policing with a renewed focus on minor offenses like fare evasion. He'd also like to set up special courts to more quickly handle repeat offenders and do local bail reform to better get a handle on repeat offenders. The veteran litigator says on his website that if Albany doesn't like this, they can take him to court. Joining me now to break it all down, one of the best police reporters in the city, our very own Nicole Johnson. Nicole, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Henry.
So let's talk about the state of where policing and crime is right now. Because point of order, major crime is down, but there's a feeling of unease out there, I think it would be fair to say. So where is crime? How are people feeling on the streets?
All right, so we're looking at 5%, a little more than 5% down in all across the board in major crime, but perception is still very important. And what the mayor has not been able to do is to ease the fears of all New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's even a task that could be accomplished, all New Yorkers. But even the majority of the city, I'm in the subway all the time. Mm-hmm. We're working cases. There's random crime still happening. People are being assaulted within the system, even random attacks on the street. So perception is not meeting the numbers, if you will.
Yeah, and so let's talk about perception, because Mr. Mamdani, who wants to really do some very different things around policing and public safety, argues you can get after that perception by tackling the homelessness crisis, tackling the mental health crisis, but he is saying no more of this billions in overtime thing, no more in, necessarily a cop in every place, maybe an outreach worker in every place. How do you think that will play? Do you think New Yorkers are ready for something that different?
Well, I believe removing any talk of removing officers out of the subway system is a pretty bad idea. We have thousands flooding the system now. And to say we're going to remove and rely on outreach workers or community groups, I got to see that play out in order to know if it could be effective or not. Right now, the more officers in the system, what we're getting, people like to see a police officer on the platform. They complain if they're not on the platform and if they're up on the mezzanine level, if they're not on the train. So, when you hear a plan to remove officers, it's not really sitting well with the average New Yorker.
And progressives would argue, well, we've done so much for so long with cops, let's try something else. If we get a Mayor Mamdani, certainly we're going to see in real time what happens, how people feel. But let's focus back on something I mentioned in passing, the police overtime issue. Everyone points to this as a problem, with the exception of the mayor, who's taken to saying, don't talk to me about overtime, we're bringing crime down. Is this overtime situation a problem? Do we need more cops right now?
Well, we can't talk about the overtime issue without the trust issue. They have to rebuild trust within that NYPD out the gate. And then when you look at that overtime, there's been a scandal about the abuse of overtime. We've seen it play out in headlines recently where folks are padding their timesheet. So you have a black eye there. I don't understand how you can police, and I understand what the mayor is saying. He's bringing down crime. They're putting officers where we need them to be. How can we do it without increasing overtime? I don't think you can, especially with less officers within the police department. But there is that trust issue. So the mayor can cry, hey, we need, I have to do overtime. We need more officers on overtime. But we also have that trust issue. Are resources being used properly? Are the officers rotating in and out of their shifts properly? These are questions that people want to know. But you can't have a safer city, I don't believe, in my experience being out there, without officers walking that beat, without officers in the street, without officers out there. Whether or not it's overtime, I definitely feel we may need more officers to fill the city and to make people feel safe. So I'm not sure how that overtime piece is going to play, but I know that trust needs to be restored.
Yeah, even other progressives during the primary phase, for Brad Lander, who became very closely aligned with Mamdani, was saying, we need to increase the number of officers. Mamdani is alone in both in this general election race and in his primary race, and saying we don't necessarily need more officers. So it's a differentiation. Whether or not people are supportive or not, I think could be one of the key different issues in this race. But Nicole, we're going to leave it there. So I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you so much, Henry.
And when we come back, we're going to tackle transportation, from subways to buses to bikes to congestion pricing. Stick around. Welcome back to this special edition of PIX on Politics. The next mayor of New York City will need to keep things moving, literally, from subways to to buses, to bike lanes, to congestion pricing. There are a variety of views of the candidates running to be mayor. Let's go ahead and break those down. The signature proposal of the Democratic nominee, Zohran Mamdani, is to make buses free and fast with more busways. Mamdani would need money and the MTA's help to do that, but as mayor, busways would be firmly within his control. He'd also look to supercharge bike lane expansion. Former Governor Cuomo says the better way to go would be an expansion of the Fair Fares program, which makes public transportation free to low-income New Yorkers. He also does see some value in further exploring a free bus pilot that showed some promise last year. Cuomo often leans into his experience as governor in getting the Second Avenue subway expansion done and says he would propose a city takeover of the subways if elected. Mayor Eric Adams has really leaned into heavy policing on the subways, platforms and trains specifically, and has encouraged people to take public transportation during the recovery from the pandemic. The mayor is also focused on homeless outreach, including removing people from the subway system, but that has seen minimal impact on the quality of life underground. Adams has been criticized for the slow expansion of bus and bike lanes, despite campaign promises he made 4 years ago. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican, has been a skeptic of bike lane expansion and is pledging to end congestion pricing, which tolls drivers entering Manhattan below 60th Street, even though the governor and the MTA primarily have control of that program. Sliwa also says he would work to combat fare evasion on buses and subways. Jim Walden, the Independent, has suggested licensing e-bike employers like Uber and DoorDash, making them accountable for safety concerns that have popped up around the proliferation of e-bikes. Walden also said he would pause congestion pricing and not bring it back until there's a better, well-thought-out plan for implementing it. Finally, he says he would work to increase the number of EV charging stations around town. And joining us now to break down all the transportation issues in this race for mayor is Greg Mocker. I pulled him right off the train, or is it a bus, Greg?
It depends. Sometimes I walk, I ride a bike too. I just get here.
Let's talk about the Mamdani bus plan. Would cost some $700 million from either city funds or MTA funds or some sort of mix of that. Is this even remotely doable?
It certainly is the thing that has caught a lot of people's attention now. Fast and free buses. Fast is something everybody wants. The price tag is something. And it certainly is an example of how all these people would have to work together on something. The city does contribute to the MTA's budget. They pay for a portion of the bus operations already. But all of that would have to be worked out. You'd have to have the governor on board. It would even take an MTA vote in order for a fare to change. That's a policy that state law requires that the board vote on. The MTA chairman has been very careful to not endorse. I think he certainly doesn't want to endorse a candidate. He hasn't come out to say either way if he thinks they should be free. He's been asked that directly several times. He keeps returning to, well, I'm glad they're talking about transit, which is something that we can all agree on. But this is something that would have to kind of wait and see. Could this work out? Would it have to be some hybrid of who pays for it? That would be determined.
Is it, in talking to Mr. Mamdani about this, he seemed to say if we can find a way to pay for it, he's heard some openness from the MTA behind closed doors, and he'd be willing to accept a more gradual expansion, let's say a quarter of the buses or one borough's buses, just moving the ball forward. Is that a more reasonable expectation here should he be elected?
I think that anything seems to be possible. The MTA, I know, is going to bring up fare evasion in any one of these conversations. They want to be careful about having some buses that are free and some others that aren't. It becomes confusing for the riders. It sends a message that this isn't something to pay for. I think that they would have to work all of that out. But, you know, it's New York. Sometimes they give something a try, as they did with that free bus pilot. It was one in every borough for a year. You know, it showed some increased ridership. Maybe people were just riding it more that rode it anyway. But a lot of data to kind of look at and wonder about and work out.
On congestion pricing, a couple of congestion pricing skeptics, Mr. Walden in particular and Mr. Sliwa in particular, who's not even a skeptic, he doesn't want it to exist. Is any candidate promising to get rid of it being unrealistic because of who controls this?
Probably, yes. I mean, it would take an act of the state legislature right now to do it, so a governor would have to be involved. A judge still could, and there is that pending federal lawsuit, but that judge has indicated that he believes that the process was true and held up for this, and just within the last couple of weeks, or midsummer, some of the other lawsuits had been dismissed. So, everybody from the state is on board with what congestion pricing is doing, at least with the current administration and the MTA, on track to raise $500 million.
And has improved travel times by all metrics, if I'm understanding correctly.
And that the traffic is down, the injuries are down. They'll point to some economic indicators that are better, but the critics will say, hey, my business is suffering. We've seen a drop. And then they'll say, well, transit ridership is up. But it does seem that it is here to stay and that people are adjusting to it. It would take a major act to stop it. The mayor could have a lot to say about it and galvanize people's opinion.
The bully pulpit, of course. Let's talk about bus and bike lane expansion because we're running out of time just a little bit here. So Mayor Adams taking a lot of heat for not keeping promises he made about bike lane expansion. He specifically canceled a big busway expansion not too long ago, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, there was a Fordham Road one that up in the Bronx because some of the business leaders said people drive. That has been a reality, and we know this. The neighborhood is going to speak. People are going to say, this is going to be an impact. What's the unintended consequence? Sometimes you just give something a try. Sometimes you pause something and say you can't. But the mayor's big thing would be buses. If somebody wants to move ahead with that, they're going to get applause on one side and criticism on the other.
So maybe Mayor Adams found out, easier said than done. Real quick at the end here, former Governor Cuomo proposing the city take over the subway system. Interesting coming from the former governor, to say the least. But that being said, is that remotely possible?
I mean, in the technicalities of the law, the city kind of owns the infrastructure, but that actually happening, again, would take the governor, the current governor, and the legislature changing things. How would the structure, the money, the funding work, since state funding really keeps the MTA going?
No, certainly something worth talking about in the closing days of the campaign. Greg, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Henry.
And coming up next, our final issue facing the mayor of New York City, the looming large presence of President Trump, his funding cuts, his mass deportation pledge, his personal feelings toward the candidates, all of that when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Henry Rosoff, senior political reporter at PIX 11, as we continue to go issue by issue and candidate by candidate in the race for New York City mayor. The final issue, per se, is President Trump. Mr. Trump's cuts to Medicaid and food benefit programs could end up blowing a hole in the city budget and impacting New Yorkers. Let's begin with Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist who President Trump antagonistically calls a communist. The two have already clashed since Mamdani won the Democratic nomination, with President Trump questioning Mamdani's citizenship. And Mamdani, by the way, has lived here since he was 7 years old. He was naturalized in 2018. Mamdani has promised to block ICE agents at every turn from carrying out deportations in the city. But in a weird twist, we have seen a fair number of supporters of President Trump also back Mamdani, because like Trump in 2024, Mamdani's been focused on a message of affordability. Governor Cuomo argues that he has the experience to deal with President Trump due to his high-profile battles during the COVID pandemic and also winning several legal challenges against the first Trump administration while governor. Cuomo says he would organize civic and protest groups against what he calls the chaos that President Trump is intentionally trying to create with federal law enforcement. However, Cuomo has been tied to several of the wealthy donors who have also supported President Trump in the past. Mayor Eric Adams has for some time been walking a tightrope as it relates to President Trump. They've had an increasingly cozy relationship, including several meetings, and he's praised the president ever since the Trump administration moved to dismiss his corruption case. The mayor allegedly traded favors with Turkish officials and committed campaign finance fraud. Mayor Adams denies this and an alleged quid pro quo with President Trump, where he offered to help with priorities, including immigration enforcement, in exchange for his charges being dropped. Finally, Mayor Adams has several times now been slow to sue the Trump administration over funding cuts and been slow to criticize policies that may harm the city. Curtis Sliwa is, of course, in the same party as President Trump. Sliwa says he respects President Trump and is not afraid to say when he both agrees and disagrees with him. He has been supportive of President Trump's immigration enforcement effort, and President Trump has not endorsed Mr. Sliwa. Finally, Jim Walden really leaning on his legal background and how he would approach President Trump. He says he would form a quote-unquote New York City Freedoms Task Force, a team of 50 elite attorneys focused on pushing back against President Trump and suing the Trump administration with proactive legal action. Walden makes the argument that Zohran Mamdani makes New York City more of a target in the eyes of President Trump, giving him an excuse to get more aggressive on deportation efforts, funding cuts, and so on. Joining me once again is J.C. Polanco, attorney, political analyst, and assistant professor at the University of Mount St. Vincent. J.C., let's start with a point that Mr. Walden likes to make, and that is that Mr. Mamdani makes New York City a target. We have already seen an increase in rhetoric from President Trump, the communism comments, the implication that he's not a citizen. Does Walden have a point here, and is that even fair to Mr. Mamdani?
Well, he clearly has a point. New York City will be a target, but most progressive cities across the country are targets for President Trump. I mean, whenever, let's distract by coming after progressive cities. But I think that that's a point that Mr. Walden makes that just really helps out Assemblyman Mamdani, because I think that when you think about New York voters want nothing else but to go get a fight with President Trump, and they want to have someone that's able to fight back, and someone that would be a target may not be the worst thing for them in a campaign.
So it's an attack disguised as a campaign ad.
I think so. The worst thing, Henry, would be an endorsement. Can you imagine? President Trump says, I think I could work with.
Well, he's done that in the past. If memory serves,
Mamdani.
he like in a tongue-in-cheek way endorsed, was it Goldman or Mondaire Jones in a congressional race like a couple of years back?
Yeah, but that was more
It was
kiss of
clearly, it was clearly him messing with the field.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
that was President Trump trying to put his finger on the scale.
So brass tacks here. Who is best positioned to deal with President Trump? Is it Mr. Mamdani, who said he wouldn't play ball at all? Is it Mr. Cuomo with the experience? Is it Mr. Adams with this sort of, moderate relationship where he agrees and disagrees with it? I mean, what's the best tactic? Who's the best candidate right now?
Well, clearly President Trump respects strength. I've seen that. I've seen that in my time studying him. I've never was a supporter of the president and his campaigns, but watching him, he respects strength. And the person I think who has demonstrated that strength in the past has been Governor Cuomo. I don't think anyone would argue that, because we've seen it. We've seen it during the COVID crisis, hands-on. So I don't know whether or not we have, time will tell of whether Assemblyman Mamdani will be able to. I don't think that the right approach, representing the most important city in the country, is to say that you're not going to work with President Trump at all. I think that's definitely not the way to go. And clearly, Mayor Adams has demonstrated he has a good working relationship with the president. The question for Mayor Adams will be, as far as Democrats in the city go, have they lost confidence in Mayor Adams' working relationship with the president? Is it more now of, I need you, President Trump? Or is it more like, I'll go toe-to-toe with you when necessary? And from Democrats that I've spoken to, remember, I'm an independent, so when I speak to the Democrats, they tell me no, they don't trust whether or not President Trump can go and face off against Mayor Adams.
If I may, do they point to that moment on Fox News where he was sitting on the couch with Mr. Holman? Because that seems to have been a pretty kiss of death moment for
That was
Mayor.
it. That was it. And we have seen, look, I was a big fan of Mayor Adams, and we have seen Mayor Adams be that mayor swag, mayor tough, former cop. I mean, and to see that moment when Honan said that to him really devastated a lot of us. So, and a lot of Democrats that supported him cite that. But he does have a record of being able to go toe-to-toe. Maybe on a second term, he would be that independent streak, since you can't bring those charges back anyway.
I mean, not too long ago, you just had the Secretary of Homeland Security and Mr. Holman back in town saying, all this sanctuary city stuff, including the shooting, the very unfortunate shooting of the Border Patrol agent not too long ago, was the fault of Mayor Adams, which is not a fair criticism.
Not at all.
Because Mayor Adams has been one of the few willing to say he'd like to modify sanctuary policy. Yep. But that almost, from this political perspective, boosts him in that, he's not purely in the pocket.
That helped him out a great deal. Absolutely. To the earlier question, Henry, I found really interesting. Assemblyman Mamdani said he's not going to work with ICE at all. That means that they're going to flood the zone.
But they're doing that already, right?
They're doing it. Could you imagine having a mayor say, we're not working with you at all?
Even on federal gang busts, for example.
No. That's going to be a major problem. And it's going to be really tough on those hardworking undocumented immigrants that are here in New York City, that are part of our families, that are part of our culture, that really make New York City a vibrant place. For them to live under that terror, it will be tough. So I would really caution Assemblyman Mamdani, if he does get elected, to not work with ICE at all. I mean, that would be a big mistake.
Okay, well, JC, really appreciate you hanging out with us so much today. I know you're sticking around for some final thoughts in this race for mayor. We'll be right back. And joining me one final time is JC Polanco for some final thoughts on this race for mayor and the important issues. So JC, final thoughts.
Exciting race. We're seeing a role reversal, though. You see, Salmi Mamdani was the guy in the streets just a couple of months ago. Now he's a guy on the podium getting endorsements, and it's Governor Cuomo in the streets with his sleeves rolled up, music in the back. Exciting talking to people.
Governor Cuomo really is the TikTok candidate, obviously.
He's a TikTok candidate now. It's really out of this world to see that role reversal. Exciting times. We're in for a treat for those of us that love New York City politics.
And then I really did want to get your insights on something I know you've been researching intensely in your role as a professor, and that is Latino community, the issues, the voting trends. What do we need to know about this important constituency heading into this? Of course, not a monolith by any means,
Right.
but what have you sort of developed and understood in recent years?
I got to tell you, I'm very amazed. We've never had a citywide elected official or a statewide elected official yet. We haven't run a citywide Latino for statewide since the 80s, and we haven't had a citywide run since me in 2017, and before me, Fernando Ferrer. So when you have such a powerful vote, the Latino vote starts asking, when are we going to be invited to the big dance? When are we going to have a role at the table? I think Latino community has a lot to learn from the South Asian community, from the East Asian community, how they united and propelled the Salmi Mamdani to be the first South Asian to run for a citywide office at a major party line. That's huge. But the Latino vote is not monolith. So we want to know about what are your plans for education, for economic development. We want to know what are you going to do about crime, and how are you going to make the city affordable, yet one that we can work in, live in, and be able to raise our families. So how they cater to and speak to the Latino vote is going to matter, because we're going to play a very decisive force this year.
And that absolutely makes sense. I mean, that's that old adage, all politics are local, right? What you didn't hear you just mention was President Trump.
Right.
What I didn't hear you just mention was, the impact of federal spending cuts, right? It's like, no, Mr. Mayor, what are you going to do for me and my children?
And after this election, I think there's going to be a discussion in the community as to where are Latinos in the political landscape. I'll give you a quick analysis I want to share with you before our time's up. The Latino Lawyers Association, Dominican Bar Association, the Puerto Rican Bar Association just put out a report from the judiciary. Although we make up 20% of all New Yorkers, we make up less than 9% of state judges. And something has to give at some point, and it's even less at the appellate division. So something has to give where Latinos have to stop playing the supporting character role and be part of the conversation and have a seat at the table. So I think it's only a matter of time before we have a citywide, statewide official from our community, but the time is now, and Latinos are going to have that conversation after November.
And we thank JC for spending so much time with us as we break down all of the issues and all of the candidates in this race for New York City mayor. I'm Henry Rosoff, and on behalf of myself, Nicole, Greg, and JC, we hope you learned a little something today about this important contest to lead the city. You have a great day.
Presented by AARP New York.